Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being here. If you're new, please make sure that you are subscribed to World Affairs in Context on Substack or Patreon for more and exclusive content. Just follow the links in the video description below to get connected. I would absolutely love to see you there. Is Germany planning an unprecedented move to repatriate its gold from US vaults? Well, yes. That is becoming more and more possible, and it is absolutely shocking. Among escalating tensions and economic turmoil, all of a sudden gold is back in the political spotlight, and of course not by accident. What we're seeing here is a much bigger argument about sovereignty, about power, and how fragile the transatlantic US-EU relationship has truly become. I don't think that's a secret anymore. So let's start with the basic facts that most people don't really understand or know. Germany has the second largest gold reserves in the entire world, right after the United States. In total, those reserves are worth close to 450 billion euros, but only a little over half of that gold is actually inside Germany. About 37%, roughly 1,236 tons, worth around 165 to 185 billion euros, depending on prices, is stored in the vaults of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Another chunk actually sits in London, and a smaller portion is located in Paris. So that setup made perfect sense during the Cold War. Germany was divided, and it was very dependent on its Western allies for security. So naturally, keeping gold abroad ensured access to US dollars, to liquidity in global markets, and of course it provided protection just in case Europe becomes a battleground again. So back then, no one questioned this setup, no one questioned this framework, but the world has changed. And that's why this issue is suddenly exploding into public and political debate. The immediate trigger is the growing tension between the European Union and the United States. Trade wars, tariffs, sanctions, and increasingly sharp political rhetoric have all chipped away at this assumption that Washington is a permanently stable and predictable partner. It's not. The world sees that now. It's not a reliable and predictable partner, and it has no intention to be one. Why is that, you would ask? Well, because Trump assumes that the United States is still the hegemon. As long as it projects power, economic power, military power, political power, the world will remain unipolar. So we know that we have already crossed that bridge a long time ago. The world is no longer unipolar, but it is fair to say that this open hostility toward alliances, the fixation on leverage, and Trump's willingness to weaponize economic tools makes Germany and German elites in particular ask a question that they avoided truly for decades. And the question is it really safe to keep so much of our national wealth in someone else's vault? Well, that answer, of course, is very obvious, but it may not be obvious to Germany at this point in time. Marie-Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Security and Defense, openly called for Germany's gold to be brought back from the United States, and she urged the government to act fast. That alone tells you how much the political climate has shifted. This kind of statement would have been unthinkable, truly unthinkable in the mainstream not that long ago, even a year ago. Well, Chancellor Merz, on the other hand, chose his words very, very carefully. Surely he understands the logic, but pleasing Trump is the top priority. So, especially for a state that's become a vassal of the United States. So, to that end, in the Bundestag, he said that as democracies, EU countries are quote-unquote partners and allies of the United States, not subordinates. So what else would you expect from Chancellor Merz? That is the kind of answer that we should expect him to give. Then, of course, there's the Bundesbank, and that is a very interesting contradiction to the position of Chancellor Merz. Emanuel Monk, who is a leader, economist, and former head of research and the Bundesbank itself, has publicly argued that keeping so much gold, national wealth, so much gold in the United States has become too risky. And his reasoning is very logical. He pointed to the fact that geopolitics have changed and the strategic dependence on Washington is no longer something that Germany should be comfortable with. In his words, repatriating the gold would be a step toward greater strategic independence. That argument is spreading. Michael Jaeger, who is the head of the European Taxpayers Association, has gone even further. He openly questions whether Germany would even be able to access its gold in a serious political confrontation. And that is a very good question. In fact, that is an excellent question to ask at this point in time. So Jaeger points to Trump's unpredictability, his obsession with extracting revenue anywhere possible, and even his provocative statements about seizing Greenland. So from that perspective, the gold isn't just sitting quietly in New York, in Manhattan, it is leverage. And frankly, I think that point is very, very valid. So this is important because until recently, calls to bring the gold home mostly came from Alternative für Deutschland. Their arguments were framed as nationalist in patriotic terms, which made it very easy for the mainstream to dismiss them. But that's no longer the case. The debate has crossed over, and now it's spreading in Germany. For example, Katharina Beck from the Greens has called the gold, quote, an anchor of stability and trust that must not become a pawn in geopolitical disputes. Even within Merz's own Christian Democratic camp, voices are growing louder and louder. And what I'm wondering about is, now that the EU has seized Russian assets, 300 billion in Russian sovereign assets, and they understand that international law doesn't quite work in practice. Sure, it exists, but some are more equal than others. Now they know that anything may happen to them too. And the unpredictability of the Trump administration is definitely making them question whether they're just too vulnerable. Economists like Ulrike Neyer openly says the United States can no longer be treated as a fully reliable partner under the current administration. And at the same time, there is quite strong pushback, and we need to acknowledge that too. But I would argue that the shift in mentality in Germany has already begun. We see German gold repatriation being on the docket, and it's being actively discussed and is likely to continue being a center focal point as the US-EU escalations continue. Now, it is fair to argue that gold repatriation will not occur as long as Germany remains effectively a state with a large permanent presence of foreign troops, of United States troops, and some call that occupation, similarly to Japan. So even if German government does prefer to take that gold back home, which it would be quite logical for it to do, it would be in its own interest to do so. But even if German government, let's say a couple of years from now, does prefer to repatriate gold, it would be logical to assume that when Berlin formally raises the issue of withdrawing its gold from the United States, the answer would be almost certainly no. Not just from Washington, but also from within Europe itself. London and Paris, which also hold German gold, would likely interpret repatriation as a move toward greater German political autonomy and too much of a shock. And that is not something that they're too eager to encourage for a variety of reasons that are far beyond the scope of today's video, but we would be able to discuss them in future videos. If you're interested, just let me know in in the comments below. This isn't really about gold, of course. That's not about gold bars stacked in a vault under Manhattan. That's not what it's about. This is about whether Europe, and Germany in particular in this case, believes that it can afford to remain strategically dependent on a partner that is becoming more volatile, more transactional, and less predictable by the day. But the conversation has started, and that's what's really important. This is a major shift in public debate, and especially in German political elite circles. And once questions of sovereignty, of control, and trust enter that mainstream, they likely won't disappear. Sooner or later, these issues resurface again at a much bigger scale. History repeats itself, after all, doesn't it? Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this quick video was interesting. I hope that you learned something new from this update. If so, make sure that you support my work, like, subscribe, and share. And if you can, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on YouTube, Substack, or Patreon. I appreciate every single one of you who has become a paid subscriber. Thank you so much for your support. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.